In 1962, John Wayne was the biggest star in the world. Every man wanted to be him. Every woman admired him. He had fame, money, and power that most people only dream of. But one ordinary afternoon, he stopped his car on a quiet Texas road and saw a man sitting alone outside a hospital. No family beside him, no money in his pocket, just a dying man, invisible to the world. And in that moment, the man who had won 1,000 battles on screen felt something he had never felt before. He couldn't walk away. But the people who knew John Wayne said, after that afternoon in 1962, something in him changed forever. This is that story. Before we begin, where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now, because stories like these are why this channel exists. The Texas sun hung high and unforgiving on that afternoon in 1962. John Wayne was behind the wheel, driving alone through the flat, open land after a long day on set. No crew, no cameras, no one asking him for anything. Just the road, the heat, and the silence he rarely got to enjoy. He was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix, the kind of tired that settles into a man's bones after years of performing strength he sometimes didn't feel. He drove with one hand on the wheel, his eyes barely registering the dusty buildings passing on either side. Then something caught his eye. Outside a small rural hospital, half hidden in the shadow of the building's outer wall, a man sat slumped on the ground, not resting, not waiting, just defeated. His clothes were worn thin, his frame even thinner beneath them. His head rested back against the brick wall, eyes closed, face pale as ash under the open Texas sky. Wayne's foot eased off the gas before his mind had made any decision. The car slowed. He pulled to the side of the road and sat for a moment, engine running, looking at the man through the windshield. Something held him there. Something he couldn't name and didn't try to. He turned off the engine and stepped out. The man didn't stir as Wayne approached. Up close, the picture was worse. His cheeks were hollow, his breathing shallow, his hands resting in his lap with no strength left in them. Wayne crouched down to his level, this man who filled cinema screens, who towers stood named after, and spoke quietly. "You okay, friend?" The man opened his eyes slowly. They were dark, calm, carrying the particular peace of someone who has already accepted something terrible. He looked at Wayne without recognition, without surprise. Just looked. His name was Thomas. And in a voice barely above a whisper, he told Wayne everything. Cancer, no money for treatment, no family left to call. He had walked through that hospital door that morning with nothing but hope, and they had turned him away. So he sat down outside, because he had nowhere else to go. Wayne listened to every word without interrupting once. When Thomas finished, Wayne said nothing for a long moment. He just looked at the man's eyes. And in them, he saw something that settled into him like a stone dropping into still water. He reached out and placed a steady hand on Thomas's shoulder. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you inside." Wayne walked through that hospital entrance with Thomas beside him, one hand gently supporting the man's arm. The moment the staff looked up from the front desk, the room changed. Whispers moved through the corridor like a current, eyes widened. A nurse dropped her pen. Someone in the back hallway stopped walking entirely. Wayne ignored all of it. He walked directly to the front desk and spoke clearly, without performance, without the drawl he used on screen. He told them Thomas needed a room, a doctor, and proper care, starting now. When the receptionist hesitated and began explaining hospital procedures, Wayne reached into his jacket, set cash on the counter, and looked her calmly in the eye. "Get him the best room, the best doctor. I'll cover everything." There was no argument after that. Within the hour, Thomas was cleaned up and lying in a proper hospital bed, an IV in his arm, a real pillow beneath his head. He stared at the ceiling with the quiet disbelief of a man who had expected to sleep on pavement that night. Wayne pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. Not on the edge, not halfway, but fully, like a man settling in for a while. Thomas turned his head and looked at him properly for the first time. His eyes moved across Wayne's face slowly. Then something shifted in his expression. "You're—" he started. Wayne shook his head once. "Right now I'm just a man sitting with another man." Thomas studied him for a moment longer, then let out a slow breath and nodded. And somehow, that was enough. They talked through the afternoon. Thomas spoke about his life in the way people do when they sense time running short. Honestly, without vanity. He talked about the town he grew up in, the work he used to do, the small things he had loved and the larger things he had lost. He spoke about his dreams, the way a man speaks about a country he once visited and never got to return to. Wayne listened more than he spoke. For a man whose voice had filled theaters for decades, he had very little to say that afternoon. He simply received everything Thomas offered, and he held it with care. The next day he came back. He arrived in the early afternoon carrying food, a couple of paperback books, and a small radio that he set on the table beside Thomas's bed. No cameras followed him. No publicist arranged the visit. No photographer waited in the corridor. The hospital staff noticed this. Noticed that the biggest movie star in America kept returning to a room where no one was watching, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Some things explain themselves simply by happening. On a particularly warm afternoon, the doctors allowed Thomas to sit outside in the hospital's small garden. Wayne was there when the nurse helped him into the chair, and he pulled a seat alongside him without being asked. The garden was simple. A few patches of grass, a tree casting thin shade, the sound of distant traffic beyond the walls. Thomas lifted his face toward the sun and closed his eyes for a moment, breathing it in. When he opened them, he looked sideways at Wayne with a small smile. "You know," he said, "I used to watch your movies when I was younger. You always saved everyone." Wayne looked ahead at the garden. A beat of quiet passed. "That's just the movies, friend." Thomas's smile didn't fade. "Well," he said softly, "you saved me." Wayne said nothing. He turned his face slightly away, toward the far end of the garden, and something moved across his expression. Brief, heavy, and gone before it fully arrived, like a shadow crossing ground on a cloudy day. He didn't correct Thomas. He didn't deflect. He simply sat with the words, the way a man sits with something he knows he doesn't deserve and cannot give back. The days that followed were quieter. Thomas's energy came and went in waves, some afternoons bright and talkative, others dim and still. Wayne adjusted to his rhythm without comment, arriving when Thomas was awake and sitting in silence when he wasn't. Doctors and nurses moved around them both with a kind of respectful distance, as though the room held something fragile. Then, one afternoon, Wayne stepped out to speak with the doctor in the corridor. The hallway was bright with afternoon light pouring through a long window, warm and golden in the way that Texas light tends to be. The doctor spoke quietly and directly. The cancer had progressed further than they had hoped. The treatment was doing what it could, but some illnesses do not respond to money or will or the best available care. It simply was what it was. Wayne stood in that corridor for a long time after the doctor walked away. The sunlight fell across the floor in long strips. He looked at it. Then he straightened, rolled his shoulders once, and walked back through the door. Thomas looked up when he entered. Wayne met his eyes and smiled. Easy, unhurried, giving nothing away. "You're looking better today," he said. There was one morning that felt different from the rest. Thomas woke with color in his face, a steadiness in his voice, and an alertness in his eyes that had been absent for days. The nurses smiled when they checked on him. The doctor noted it carefully without promising anything. Wayne arrived that afternoon to find Thomas sitting up, ready to talk. They laughed that day, genuinely without effort. Wayne told a story about a scene gone wrong on a film set years earlier, some mishap involving a horse and a director who took himself far too seriously, and Thomas laughed until his eyes watered. It was the laugh of a man who had forgotten, briefly, where he was and what was coming. Wayne watched him laugh and memorized it. The sound, the way his face changed, the particular quality of that afternoon light coming through the open window. He filed it away carefully, the way you keep something you know you will not get again. The following afternoon, Wayne received a call. He drove to the hospital quickly and walked through the corridor without stopping. When he entered the room, Thomas was awake, but still, very still, in the way that signals something has shifted beyond recovery. His breathing had changed. His hands rested loose at his sides. Wayne sat beside him and took his hand. Thomas turned his head slowly. His eyes found Wayne's face and stayed there. When he spoke, his voice was thin but clear. "Thank you," he said, "for not leaving me alone." Wayne tightened his grip, his jaw set. He opened his mouth and found he had nothing, not a single word that fit the moment or deserved a place in it. So he said nothing. He simply held on. The afternoon light came through the window at a low angle, falling soft and even across the bed. Thomas closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, then quieted, then stopped. Gently, without struggle, with the hand of John Wayne holding his. Wayne walked out of the hospital alone. He came through the same entrance where he had first found Thomas, the same doors, the same stretch of wall, the same pavement underneath. He stopped at the exact spot where Thomas had been sitting that first afternoon. He looked down at the ground for a moment, as though something of the man might still be there. The afternoon sun was still bright. The air was still warm. Texas looked exactly as it had on the day this all began. And yet standing in that same spot, Wayne felt the full and absolute difference between a world that contains a person and a world that no longer does. He stood there for a long time. No one approached him. No one spoke. Eventually, he walked to his car and got in. He did not start the engine. He sat with both hands in his lap and looked at the hospital building through the windshield, its plain walls, its ordinary windows, the door that had now opened and closed on something he would carry the rest of his life. He thought about Thomas's last words, turned them over slowly, the way you handle something delicate. "Thank you for not leaving me alone." The Duke, the man who had stared down outlaws and enemies on 100 screens, who had never once flinched when the cameras were rolling, sat in a parked car on a Texas afternoon and let his eyes fill. Not with performance, not for anyone watching, just because grief, when it is real, does not wait for a private moment. He never spoke publicly about Thomas. No interview, no statement, no carefully worded acknowledgement. The story did not appear in columns or fan magazines. It belonged to no one but the two men who had lived it, and now only one. But those who spent time with Wayne in the years that followed noticed something, a quietness in him that had not been there before, a willingness to stop, to listen, to sit with people in their difficult moments without needing to fix or perform or fill the silence. He became less loud about kindness and more committed to it, as though he had learned in that hospital room that the real thing requires no audience. John Wayne spent his entire career playing men who saved the day, men who always rode in on time, men who never lost, but the one man he could not save saved something in him instead, something that no film role had ever reached, something that stayed long after the Texas dust settled and the afternoon light faded and the road stretched on ahead, quiet and unchanged into whatever came next.